Hi, I'm Mike B and welcome to 15 Minute Marketing. This is a new show where we're going to be interviewing marketeers from across the UK and worldwide to give you tips on how to run your business. Floss, nice to meet you.
Hi Mike, how are you?
Very well, thank you. Thank you so much for coming on 15 Minute Marketing.
Thank you for having me.
Then it's really nice to meet you. First time we met today as well, which is awesome. So you're of Florence Bate, PR and Communications.
I am.
So you've only recently started as well, haven't you?
I have, yeah. Sadly, I was made redundant in May, but have come back stronger, self-employed.
Amazing.
In the middle of a pandemic. What better time?
A COVID business baby.
There we are.
So we're going to set the timer going now on 15 minutes. So I'm going to fire some questions at you to try and give these lovely people that are watching us some hints and tips from your expertise. So Nicola, if you could hit the 15-minute timer now, that'd be awesome. So Floss, why do you do what you do?
I am a real people person. I like getting to the bottom of what makes people tick. I think you have to have a certain passion for PR. There was a survey that went out the other day on the top 10 most stressful jobs in the world, and below brain surgeon, heart surgeon at number 1, PR professional was actually number 4.
I can imagine that, actually. I could not do what you do.
Yeah, so it is very stressful, but you have to have a real drive for it. As I say, I'm a real people person. I love speaking to media, and no day is the same, which makes it easier.
That's the dream, surely, isn't it? Yeah,
definitely.
It's got to be done, isn't it? So how did you go about starting your own business then? Kind of what inspired you to go off on your own and do what you do, and what's gone well about it so far in a COVID year as well?
The COVID year. So this year is one that many people will never forget for lots of reasons. So as mentioned earlier, I was made redundant sadly in May, and then had a weekend of drinking lots and crying. And then actually it was my mum that turned around and said, have you ever thought about getting self-employed? And I used a few expletives and said, in the middle of a pandemic, what do you mean? And then I slept on it, and I thought, actually, I've got a real passion for something that the job market in Cornwall at the time, beginning of the pandemic as well, there weren't any jobs, definitely not in marketing and communications. A lot of the budgets were being cut. So I thought, actually, let's do something a bit different. And I kind of I'm like this little swan that's gone out, and my feet are going like this. And on the top, I'm trying to be really elegant and cool. So I went out from September, and doing really well. We're now 3 months
Amazing.
into, as you say, the conception of the COVID baby. 3 months into it, it's 3 months old, and it's going really well.
Well, there's been so many businesses that have come about because of COVID that will need your help as well. So it's not like you're even entering a sector in business which was the same size 12 months ago. It's grown. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that's actually a really, really good point, Mike, because in the first wave, when the pandemic first hit and when the pandemic was first declared a pandemic in March, everyone's reaction was very much cut everything. Let's cut the marketing budget. Absolutely not. Don't want that. And now people have come to plan for 2021 and beyond. And you find that people are thinking, actually, what can we strategically do that puts us in a better position?
Yes.
With PR, you're working long leads, time frames are kind of 6 months. So you're having to think forward, you're having to forward plan, and actually having a really good plan in place for a lot of businesses now mean that PR and marketing is actually at the top of the priority list.
Definitely. And we found that exactly the same thing, is that for next year, people are planning really far ahead, which is only going to help people at the end of the day. So coming on to the next bit now, and you probably get asked this a lot, being in the industry you're in, what are your main kind of tips and tricks for like PR and communications, and what do you think works well for business?
So I think there are a few things that I would say.
It's a big question.
It is a very big question.
Very broad.
But on what we've just said, about people planning in advance, I think there is huge credit in planning in advance, and having definite themes, but also on the flip side of that being slightly fleet of foot. So recognizing that long-term plans are really important. But also, for example, we don't know 2020. If anything has taught us that we don't know what's coming up.
I don't know whether I had a plan this year that went well.
No. And so, you know, having the long-term vision is really important, but also being able to, as I say, be slightly fleet of foot, recognise that the basic qualities of your business and your marketing strategy are there, but then the top line bits and bobs, being able to, you know, change last minute, be quite flexible.
Always be reactive in a way.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, it's reactive, but also being proactive on the reactive.
I get you.
Which
is...
is...
keeping an eye on, like, trends and keeping an eye on what's going on in the wider world.
Yeah, and I think that's something that a lot of businesses have found, is that they're very, very insular in kind of their marketing and what they're doing and their day-to-day running in the business. They're actually taking a step back, and that's where third-party consultants, bit of a toot of the horn, but a consultant is really helpful because they've got the wider vision.
They have.
And, you know, the day-to-day is really important to them. Of course, it's the bread and butter, but actually looking around and seeing what you actually do need to focus on is important too.
I know as a business owner for myself as well, I find that you can get wrapped up in your business.
Yeah.
And having a consultant, especially within PR, having a look from outside in is really useful, isn't it?
Yeah. And, you know, I spend 90% of my time talking to people, and part of that is talking to journalists. And journalists are the newsbreakers, so they know often what's happening. You know, they're sent things under embargo, all the rest of it, but they can lead to say, actually, you know, in a private conversation, actually this is about to happen, what about this?
Yes.
And that can then lead into a whole different tangent of where businesses need to go.
Yeah.
And that's really important, you know, making sure that you are ready for that. And as I say, as 2020 has taught us, we all need to be ready for the next step.
We do, 2021.
Yeah. Another tip, I think, is to remember that everyone's human. I think people are very, very good in marketing at talking all marketing spiel and lots of, you know, acronyms and all the rest of it. But everyone's human, and that's something really important from a client side, but also from a media side. One thing that I've really learned is how important relationships are.
Hugely. Especially in Cornwall as well.
Yeah, definitely. Cornwall especially, and making sure that, yes, there's a certain way for making a name for yourself in the corporate division, but you don't necessarily have to leave with a corporate kind of mindset. It's being professional, but being professional yet friendly, which I think is actually one of the most important parts, especially of what I do. Making sure that you're approachable, but also, yes, I'm a marketing consultant a PR consultant in my own right, but I'm actually, you know, I am a human too, and therefore, if you call me at 8 a.m. on a Sunday morning, don't be surprised if I don't pick up.
Well, exactly, and that's all the world of being a business owner, as I'm sure you'll find as well. So what can you offer clients? What I always ask this to pretty much everybody, like, what do you do differently?
Yeah, so when I was lucky because I had a 3-month notice period, so I had 3 months to really think about what I wanted to do differently and what really made me tick. So I came up with my ethos, which is to be honest, and that's what I really pride myself on, is a very honest approach to communications, as my clients will thank me for.
Well, people love honesty, don't they?
They do, but sometimes if it's, you know, when you're in-house and you're within a division and people are very can be quite single-minded on the approach that they think's best, and then you get a third-party consultant in that tells you, actually, can you do this instead?
Yes.
That is actually really important, to feel that, you know, to have the relationship with the client that I can do that. So that is something that I really think is important. Also, having a purpose, because I think in PR especially, you can get quite lost in just trying to PR things and make things sound good. It's essentially, obviously, what I'm meant to do. But to have a purpose for that. So I actually set out a certain portion of my time per month to help a charity or a startup.
Oh, amazing.
So I think being purposeful gives you back. You know, I'm essentially paid for what I'm doing, and therefore I'm really lucky. I've got a really lovely bunch of clients at the moment, but thank yous don't come about that often. So to go back to the basics and think about what actually makes me tick, I find working with charities, working with small businesses really makes the difference.
Well, that comes on nicely actually to my next question. So what advice can you give to like other small businesses and kind of startups and freelancers and things like that?
So in a personal capacity, I would say always set aside time for admin, because it's one of those things that always goes by
I'm terrible at it.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm very lucky. I have Spencer, my business partner, that does all of that for me, and the lovely Nicola.
You are very lucky.
Yes.
I've taken a hit. I've it's very easy to see pound signs and think, oh, this is brilliant, this is all coming in. But I've actually called upon one of my really good friends who's just started out as another self-employed virtual assistant to kind of do all the things that I have every will in the world of doing, but just don't get around to it. And I think it's really important, and it shouldn't be underestimated, because that is what keeps you up at night. You know, the work-life balance is quite tough.
Would you say that literally comes on again to my next question? Because what are the pros and cons to freelance work from your point of view? Because a lot of people are going into it, and you're new to it obviously as well. So it'd be good to get your first impressions of what the first few months have been like, and any advice that you can pass on to people starting now as well.
So as I say, I am no expert at this, and I'm not trying to bill myself as an expert. I found, as I say, the work-life balance is particularly hard. I'm lucky. I've got a very, very excitable Cocker Spaniel who makes me get out and makes me go on dog walks, because otherwise he's quite irritating. So having that break is really important.
It's that thinking time, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think also one thing that I do is I am a big believer in independent businesses, and especially the hospitality market at the moment is, really, really struggling. And one thing that I have done is take myself away from my office and gone to work in a hotel in Newquay overlooking the sea or something like that. So I think there's a work-life balance, but there's also making it work for you. And I was in a corporate, a corporate business for, my history is in agency. And so it was never that easy to just escape and work from somewhere else.
Of course.
So now I have the ability to do that. I do try and take myself off, and I would really, really recommend anyone starting out, whether it's just you go for a coffee. Normally, my ideal day is taking the dog for a walk, then going for a coffee, and then just cracking on with some work.
Amazing.
Dog's tired, fabulous. Don't get someone biting my ankles.
So it's very much outcomes over hours almost in a way, which is the dream, isn't it, for everybody?
Definitely. And I think, being quite stringent on making sure that you do stuff like that, because, if I've spent a day, for example, I get up, I work from 9 and then I go for a dog walk and then I work all afternoon. It doesn't matter for me if I'm still working at 7, because I've got out, and actually a lot of the time when I'm out of the office, or my tiny office being a tiny part of my dining room,
excellent work.
It's really important to have that extra vision. That's something not to be underestimated. What someone always said to me, make sure you get a good accountant and some good business insurance.
I think that's a really good advice. I got told the same thing when we set up Big Box 3 years ago, and that's exactly where we're at now. By having that extra support, and there's things that you're not good at around you come together, it means that you can do what you love and what you're good at better.
Definitely. And I think there are parts of a business that, as I was saying earlier, one of my friends helping me on kind of the admin side is actually the most valuable thing, because it means that I can then put together more proposals or do the outcomes that I need to do in a week without stressing about it. Business insurance is slightly trickier now because of COVID, as I've realised. The product of COVID makes business
tough, isn't it?
It makes business insurance tough. But I think it is really important, because people are trying. Sadly, there are a small portion of businesses, I haven't come across any yet, that will try and make public liability a thing, and that's something that I think you just have to be aware of.
Of course you do. Well, that talk about COVID goes on to my last question. We've got 3 minutes left, so no pressure. Okay. What advice would you give to businesses during the COVID-19 pandemic in regards to what your expertise is?
So I think being honest with yourself. I've obviously dealt with a lot of crisis management in the last 3 months, which is something that people are quite scared of. But making sure that you think through the messaging in being singular but also honest, and I think that's really important, because at the end of the day, people do buy from people, and PR is a sales technique in some senses, but it also is your representation to the public, and therefore, if you have a crisis, for example, an honest account will always go down better than a really defensive account.
Completely agree.
And I think that is kind of one really good thing, especially during a pandemic.
And there's a lot to talk about during a pandemic as well, and there's a lot of things that are changing. I suppose, again, is it using that word reactive again is something you probably need to be with your PR as much as everything else.
Absolutely, being reactive, and as I said earlier, being fleet of foot.
The phrase
of the moment.
That is good.
And making sure that you also one of the biggest things is making sure that everybody is aware.
Yeah.
So in the company, PR is often left to the marketing department. But if, for example, there's a product recall or if anything goes wrong, ultimately reception need to know, because if press call reception, you know, you don't want someone answering something that isn't actually approved.
Yes.
Factory workers need to know. Don't underestimate the fact that everyone needs to know the PR.
It's top down from the company.
Absolutely, yeah.
I suppose making sure that communication with you and your company is as important as communication outwardly. Then.
Absolutely, especially in the pandemic, making sure that employees feel valued, and a lot of that is PR, because it's thinking about what you're actually already doing, but to get the message across properly. So internal and external communications is vital.
I can imagine that. And there's a hell of a lot talked about. Companies have dealt with certain aspects. I mean, I'm not going to name any obviously on this because we don't want to get sued.
Let's not.
But there's been companies nationally, internationally that have dealt with COVID quite well, and ones that haven't. You know.
Definitely.
And I suppose that's down to good and bad PR at the end of the day.
Yeah, and PR is a relatively diverse way of thinking of things. You know, it's internal and it's external, and that's what's so important, is that actually the message that you put to your colleagues is almost just as important as the message you're putting out to the wider world.
Really interesting, isn't it? So there's a lot to take away though. I'm going to take away fleet of foot from this.
Oh no.
And being reactive, certainly. So that is literally the end, Florence. Or Floss, I should call you. So thank you so much, Floss,
Mike,
for joining on the show.
No, thank you.
Make sure you check out your website as well, which we will put on the show.
Brilliant.
Thanks very much for having us. Bye.